All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Emily Spranger. I'm an academic trainer in the Center for Teaching and Learning, and I'm grateful to have you join us today for our Scale Up series with one of our very own, Dr. Mary Streit, presenting What Does the Modern Day Workplace Look Like? If you do have questions, please do pop them in the chat. Happy to get to that as time permits. And the other housekeeping thing I want you to remember is that we are recording this. I will pop it in our Center for Teaching and Learning webinar resource center. And I think that about covers it for right now. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to pass this right on over to Dr. Streit to get us started.
Okay, so thank you, Emily, and thank you everyone for taking some time to be here today. This is a topic that, let me just do this so you can see it. So I did change the title of this from What Does the Modern Day Workplace Look Like Post-Pandemic to just What Does the Modern Day Workplace Look Like? And the reason why I did that was to be very precise, because we are still in the middle of the pandemic. It's much better. I was being maybe a little bit overly eager and optimistic, but the World Health Organization has not yet said that we are now in an endemic and no longer a pandemic. So I just wanted to clarify that I am not a World Health expert, and I did make that correction there. And I think that's a good thing. Like we were talking a little before, that it's good to be precise when you're presenting and when you're representing, yourself in some way professionally. So I just wanted to make that correction there. And this topic is a real fun one, I think, to talk about, because everyone has some kind of experience or some kind of a way that they can connect to this. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this. And I've also been doing some research in this area. I presented this at a couple of conferences, and I also have been looking at how to work remotely in a way that's healthy. And I think a lot of us struggle with that or have struggled with that in some way. So that's my own research. So it kind of grew into this as well. Okay, so working from home during the global pandemic has been the greatest shift in the workplace since World War II. And as of December 2022, about 30% of all work in the United States occurs at home remotely. So just take that in for a minute. It's been a major change, a huge disruption in everyone's life, in how we work, the way we go about it. Now, with that in mind, there's a lot of terminology that goes along with this. So what I wanted to do is to kind of just talk about some of these terms briefly and to see maybe what you know. I was going to do like a little quiz, but I'm like, no, I don't want to put them too much on the spot. But I'm going to use some of these terms, not all of them, but some of them in the presentation. So I thought it'd be helpful if you knew what they actually meant. So when I say the term remote capable employees, how many of you have ever heard that? You can even just raise your hand if you want to. You ever heard that term before? Wendy has, okay. A bunch of you have heard of that.
I have not.
So Wendy, do you know what that actually means? Do you want to share? George also, or Belinda?
Sure, that means that the employee has all the equipment and things and internet access set up at home, that they are capable of connecting with the workplace.
Correct. And I would add a little bit more to that, in that they also are able to do their work from home. So say like you're a garbage person. I would say garbage man, but I'm trying to be very gender neutral there. And you can't do that from home. Like you actually have to go out to your job every day. It's not possible. So there are a lot of jobs that are not remote capable, but the ones that are, or I think a lot of jobs became remote capable during the pandemic, and everybody was kind of scrambling and thinking, how can we make this a remote capable kind of job? But there are some jobs that are what we call the essential workers, like the nurses, the doctors, the garbage men, the grocery store clerks, people like that. A lot of the shipping industry, things, they absolutely had to be at their job. So that was a different type of job. Okay, so remote work, that's just work you do at home instead of in the office, or it can actually be somewhere else, doesn't have to be at home. It could be in what we call a co-working space, which is a little down further on the list. So a co-working space, I don't know if any of you have experienced them or been a part of them. You actually will rent out a place and you share it. I think WeWorks was a real popular one for a while there, and you go and you are not with the same people in your company, but with people from a whole bunch of different companies, and you're all working together in the same space. So that's a co-working space. The hybrid workplace is really the focus of what I'm talking about today. You're going to hear a lot about the hybrid workplace. A hybrid workplace is where you work remotely, but you also work in the actual office physically. So it's kind of a combination of both, you know, online and in person. Sort of like, I don't know if anyone here has ever taken a hybrid class where you actually, so it's kind of the same idea there. Okay, a blended team means you have people who are doing all kinds of different things. So you have some people who are in the office full time, you have some people who are, you know, working remotely all the time, and then you have people who are hybrid. It's kind of a mismatch of people. They're all doing kind of their own little thing. Distributed teams. Does anybody know what that means? You ever heard that term? It's okay if you haven't heard that before. I'm trying to see if I'm seeing everyone on the screen. I don't think I'm seeing everyone. Okay, so a distributed team really means that everybody is distributed in geographic locations that are not in the main office. So I know we were like that before we merged here at National. We were kind of spread out all over the country and distributed and not actually in one main office. So the flip side of that are what we call the co-located team. So a co-located team is another way of just saying everybody is in the same place, in the same location. So co-located. Okay, synchronous means in real time, like we're doing right now, and asynchronous is not. So that's like if you, I don't know if you ever took a class where you're posting something on the discussion board or there's a video, something like that, it's asynchronous. Or in the workplace, you might be using something like Miro, or it's like a shared work area that you all log into, and then you post your thoughts and information there. Okay, Zoom, I think we all know what that is because we're here. Cloud storage. Has anybody heard of that?
Yeah.
Belinda, have you heard that, or Emily?
Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead, Belinda.
It's in the cloud where you can pick it up from anywhere, any location.
That's right. That's right. And that became really important for a lot of companies to have that cloud storage so everybody could have access to the same information and they were able to work remotely. Brick and mortar, I think, has been around for a while. That's the more traditional university, you know, where you're actually physically in the classroom. And I think that kind of carried over sometimes a little bit to the workplace, even though you don't usually hear people saying back to the office. You don't usually hear them call it brick and mortar. I think it's more when you're talking about education. Okay, video chat and instant messaging, I think, are very similar. It's just another way that you can interact with somebody in real synchronous time. And one is just texting and the other is video. What about VPN? Did anybody ever hear of the VPN? I know, I was like, all these things. I'm like, that's right. We've all learned a lot. Look at all these things we've learned. It stands for Virtual Private Network. It's usually a way that a company can make sure that the information is secure. So you're going to have to log in. You're going to have a password and all that kind of stuff to be able to access certain information. So that's what that stands for. I didn't know it meant virtual private network. I actually never knew what it meant. I just knew what the VPN was. Okay, and then there's voice over the internet where you can actually make phone calls from your computer I've actually done this, believe it or not. You can make a phone call and it rings and it picks up. And then I've had my computer ringing on me and things like that. So it's a way you can access the telephone. Pinging it's like a little noise that kind of goes off like ding, ding, and you might hear it sometimes and like, what is that? I remember when I first logged into Microsoft Teams, I was getting these little ding noises and I'm like, what is that? Oh, it's in Teams. And I was getting messages. I'm like, oh, okay, I should go in there. And there's a way you can turn that off as well. But it's a way for you to kind of be aware of what's going on in your group or in your team. Okay, hot desking, that is where you're kind of moving from one desk to another, depending on, you don't have like a really assigned workplace or work desk. So that's very common in those co-working spaces where one day you're going to go in and you're going to be in one office and then you might be moving around in the afternoon to a different office or a different desk. So it's not really assigned. And then the other is the collaboration tools. That's where you would use them in cloud storage. That's things like Trello or Miro, where everybody signs in and it's like this collaborative space where you all can go in and kind of add your thoughts and comments and ideas. So I just wanted to share some of these because I just wanted to make it also evident like how much we've learned and how we are really working so differently today. And I think a lot of these things have been going on for a while, but perhaps more than we realize, especially within the past few years, it's really taken off. Okay, so I'm just going to try to move the faces so I can see my slide a little better. Okay, so we've had a real gradual shift towards hybrid work. So as of October 2022, Gallup poll, the majority of remote capable employees work from home, with as many as 70% working exclusively from home in May of 2020. And then if we look at today, 2022 and the beginning of 2023, most remote capable employees are still working from home, at least part-time. But now there's more of a split, with about 42% having a hybrid schedule, meaning they're both in the office and they're also working remotely, and about 39% still working entirely from home. So it's more of a split now. But the good news, I think, it appears as if right for now, at least, remote work is definitely here to stay. So as of 2022, according to Robinson, about a quarter of all professional jobs are now permanently remote as of the end of 2022. And the projection is that this number will continue to expand into 2023. Additional statistics state that by the fourth quarter of 2021, 3 million new employees transitioned to permanent remote jobs. And again, this was a sudden and abrupt increase that was well beyond what was predicted. And when compared with the number of remote positions advertised in 2021, the number of similar postings rose significantly, or around 20% in 2022. And in the most recent quarterly remote work report, about 36% of professional jobs in the US and Canada are now permanently remote. And this is 11% higher than what was predicted. So all of these kind of indicators taken together seem to suggest that remote work is really not going anywhere. It's going to stick around, and if not, continue to grow and expand. And a lot of the jobs are more permanently remote than we've ever seen in the past as well. Okay, so why is this going on? What's the big shift? So priorities really changed during the pandemic, and the benefits of remote work really outdid any kind of drawbacks or any kind of negatives that went along with them. According to a 2021 national survey, about 84% of employees reported that not having a commute was the #1 reason or benefit for working remotely, that they really didn't like commuting. And additionally, 75% of employees report that cost savings were a major benefit, where they're saving about $5,000 a year by working remotely, And I think this is particularly true in 2022 with gas prices and inflation and, everything getting so expensive. So it's really making remote work a much more attractive option for employees. Other benefits include a lack of COVID-19 exposure, not having to be away from family or even your pets. And by the way, if you hear weird snoring noises in the back, that's my dog. Having reduced childcare needs and a greater sense of satisfaction and work-life balance too. So that extra hour that people were spending, or sometimes 2 hours, depending on their commute, they had more time. So they were able to do things that they perhaps would not have done before and still get their work done. And then interestingly enough, 83% of companies say that collaboration on projects has been as good as or even better than it was before the pandemic began. Because there were a lot of people saying, oh, I don't know, it's going to be hard to communicate with people, we're going to have a hard time collaborating. And that actually didn't pan out to be true. A lot of the cloud storage and those shared spaces like Miro or Trello became very common, and people really adopted quite readily. I think especially when they didn't have to commute an hour in the morning or an hour at night and sitting in traffic and all that. I think they really were very excited about that. I don't know, did any of you experience that? Were you very happy to not have to be commuting, or you were glad there were some perks to it?
I'll just share. I absolutely loved not having to commute, just in general. That was nice. I live in the Chicagoland area, so I'm sure some folks who maybe I have a girlfriend who lives in Atlanta, and she would commute at least an hour to work, and then an hour back. She got 2 hours out of her day back. Wendy, go ahead. I see you have your hand raised.
Yes, my office is 1.5 hours away from my house.
Oh,
And, commuted that every day for many years. And just the change in quality of life that I've experienced. At this point, I work from home usually 2, sometimes 3 days out of each week. It depends on what's on my calendar for the day. And I really just value the extra time that I have on the days that I'm working from home. I'm able to exercise in the morning, take more time for meditation. It's just such a more productive day for me when I'm at home versus going to work.
Thank you so much for sharing, Wendy.
yeah, I think that was a really common kind of experience, that employees were now able to kind of take care of themselves a little bit more and do their work at the same time. And it's like, oh, wow, this is great. You can still do my job and also take better care of myself in the process. And the expectations have changed. Now, employees have more power today than ever before. With the Great Resignation of 2020, remote work really needs to be a priority for employers in order to retain and attract employees. It was the highest rate of employee resignation in over 20 years occurred during this time. And on average, employers see a reduction in turnover, about 12%, when they allow employees to do at least some work remotely. And not offering flexible work arrangements is a risk. You're going to have a hard time attracting employees and also retaining them. So in addition to the Great Resignation, we also had a large number of baby boomers, who are retiring, and they're starting to do so even in greater numbers, more and more. So there's a real shortage of workers who have skill sets and abilities nationwide, and it's becoming a serious issue. I don't know if you all saw that during the pandemic. There are always all these, help wanted signs everywhere, and they're having a hard time really getting people to take jobs. More than half of employees said they would leave their current job for a position that offered a remote work option, and 1 in 3 employees said they will quit their job if they're forced to return to work fully in person. So it's definitely a shift where I know I'm older, so when I was younger, it was kind of like you got to do whatever the employer says, and you got to be grateful you have a job, and it was more of that kind of attitude. It's shifted now. Today, it's the balance of power is moved back a little bit more to the employees. They have a lot more power, and a lot of companies you're seeing the team gets to decide how they want to organize their work week, and they'll have, you have to do 2 days in the office and 3 days at home, which are the 2 days you want in the office and which are the 3, and they have to kind of come to some kind of group decision, like we're all going to be in the office on Monday and Tuesday, and then the rest of the week we'll work remotely, and maybe on Wednesday we're going to have a team meeting or something like that. So there's more of this kind of employee decision making where they get to kind of get involved.
Dr. Streit, that makes me wonder a little bit about when employees were to say something like 1 and 3 were to say, I'm not coming back if it's not moving to remote. It makes me wonder how many of those people in that statistic were bluffing, right? Because they know that as you just mentioned, like they have the power in their hands, right? So at the end of the day, we also have to pay our bills. It does make me wonder about that in terms of
yes.
So that would be interesting to learn.
Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. I think what we were finding is that the individuals who are more experienced and have more skills and more expertise are more likely to be the ones who are in demand. They're kind of like the top talent. And if they don't have this option of remote work or this flexible, then they're going to go somewhere else where somebody's going to say, oh yeah, we want you. We're going to give you whatever you want. And those are more like the Gen Xers or the boomers that are still around. I'm more of a Gen X generation. I should probably have put those in there as well in the terms in the beginning. But the millennials and now the Gen Z, which is a very young generation now entering the workplace, actually don't want the remote work as much, which is interesting, especially when they don't have a lot of experience in the field. So I think it really depends on the individual. So thank you for sharing that. It was a good point. Oops, I think I just skipped one. I have a lot here, so I don't know if I'm going to get through it all, but I will do my best. Okay, so why the reluctance to return to in-person? So employees who have returned to the office complain that being in person is not necessary and often wasteful. So meetings are still held in Zoom rooms, and they're sitting in their offices at their desks alone, with many of their colleagues still attending remotely. So this is, again, we have, people in all different places in the workplace where some are remote 100%, some are in person 100%, and then others are hybrid. So in order to accommodate everyone, they're still doing the Zoom meetings. And a lot of employees are getting annoyed saying, I could just do this at home. Why do I have to be here? It doesn't make sense. So having some kind of productive strategy or mindfulness of how you're going to do it and why you're going to do it that way, I think really makes sense. And I think employees are looking for that much more so, especially after being remote 100% for so long too. Employees have proven that remote work is an effective way to get the job done, with productivity being on average 13% higher for remote workers. And I'm not surprised by this, to be honest, because I remember when I'd be teaching on ground more, I was a full-time tenure track professor for a number of years. And I used to sometimes be like, I got to take my work home. And I would just leave it after teaching my classes because I couldn't talk. Like everybody was socializing, or they're talking about this project, or there's some politicking kind of going on. And I was like, can everyone just leave? Like, I need to get my work done. It would get frustrating. So I think that this is a common thing that you see. And then there are concerns, though, about remote employees overworking, because what they did find is that since February 2020, time spent in meetings increased by 252%. Wow. And 90% of employees have reported some level of burnout. So again, I think even for the hybrid worker or that workplace, there has to be some kind of give and take, and you can't be having meetings all the time either, because that's not really productive, and people will be there. Maybe their face will be there, but their mind is done. They're burnt out and they're no longer really able to be present. So I think that's really important. And I remember that too, after having too many Zoom meetings back to back. It's after a while, I'm just like, where am I? What day is it? Wait, what year are we in again? It just became this blur of Zoom meetings. So finding the balance there, I think, is important. So mindfulness is key, having that in-office time, maybe have more collaborative group meetings, team building, have luncheons, socializing, that kind of stuff is really important. To have that sense of community, I think, is something that a lot of remote employees are looking for. And having that strategy for in-person versus remote work. And again, a lot of companies are letting the employees decide how to go about doing it, how to manage it.
And Dr. Streit, before we move on to this next slide, we had a question in the chat.
Oh, sure.
Do people who work remotely still work 8 hours, more or less? And that is the question. And I'll let you weigh in, but I think it depends on the organization.
Yeah, I think it depends on the organization. I think most employees who work from home are still working from home. And I find that I work more when I'm working from home. Like, I'll just work through my lunch hour and I'm like, oh, I think there's still a little bit of that overworking going on. I think we've all learned to pull back a little bit and say, hey, whoa, time out. Like, I need to take a break. Or I know at one point I was in so many meetings, I was like, I forgot to eat lunch today, or oh my gosh, I'd have to go to the bathroom. Like, what do I do? And I was like, you need to just go. Like, I'm like, be right back. So I think that we need to learn that it's okay, to take that break, or maybe I have to turn my camera off so I can eat lunch or do something. So that way you're taking care of yourself too. But I think most people are learning to kind of pull back a little bit and have more balance for your own self-preservation.
Yeah, and Dr. Streit, I agree with your sentiments. And then just Belinda, just kind of what I've noticed too, again, depending on the organization, some folks, some organizations, some positions are hourly. So they're actually clocking in and clocking out, other are salary. And so I could echo Dr. Streit's sentiments. I know sometimes I go through my day and realize, gosh, it's 3 o'clock and I haven't eaten a single thing yet. I should probably take a break. But I think it's the adjustment of moving into remote work and then just understanding, finding a balance for myself. My leadership's always been amazing. Like, take your lunch break, do what you need to do throughout the day. But I think it depends on the organization. So you do bring up a good question, Belinda.
Yeah, and also I think, I don't know if you can all relate to this, but if you're kind of like someone's watching over you and almost like micromanaging, and you have to be on at 8 and you have to be done at 5, what they've been finding that remote workers, especially, usually at a different level, they don't respond well to that, and it actually backfires. So giving people a little bit more autonomy and control, and I think that was really key during the pandemic, especially because there was so much high anxiety. So when you have a lot of anxiety, if you can give somebody a sense of control over their world and their environment, it actually helps to reduce anxiety. We know that in psychology. So I think it really is beneficial to let people kind of manage it themselves. And also, when you're trying to do too much work, you actually are less productive. It's kind of counterintuitive. I'm sure you've all experienced this, where I've even had my students tell me like, oh, professor, I'm going to lock myself in my room all weekend. I'm not going to come out. I'm going to get my paper done. And I'm like, don't do that. Like, you're not going to. And I'm like, believe it or not, you're better off going out, going to your lunch with your friends, going to whatever parties, and then still doing a little bit of work here and there. You're so much more productive that way. And your brain actually works better. So you can almost get like too close to something, and it's good to take these breaks and to kind of change it up. And having the Zoom meetings like back to back to back to back is really not very productive, believe it or not.
And Dr. Streit, would it be okay if we take one more comment on this? Diego, would you like to unmute yourself if this is in relation to what we are currently talking about? I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, hi. So the last slide talked about how it was like a 252% increase of meetings and stuff like that.
That was
um,
in February of 2020, though. I think
yeah,
it's a couple years later now. So
yeah. So no, and that makes sense. But does that make is that kind of like the equivalency of when you're at a cubicle and somebody comes by and just like explains something to you? Is that kind of like the relation to that, or is it what's the relation between those burnouts, right? Do people get burned out when somebody keeps coming to your cubicle and asking you, about that? It's kind of something I thought about. It's kind of something interesting to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, I think you have more control then over the interruptions. And I know I used to, when I had my office in my when I was teaching on ground, we used to just shut the door and I'd pull the blind down and make it. And even at one point I actually turned off the light and I had like a little lamp on my desk and I would just use that and I would hope that would work, but they would still knock. And I would obviously have to answer the door because you never know what it was. But I think you do have more control in that way, and that you're in your home environment, so you kind of can be more selective about who you can talk to and how you can focus on getting your work done too.
Yeah, and Dr. Streit, you're totally right about that piece. And then just from Diego's standpoint, in terms of the cubicle setting, like that's fascinating too, just how many times someone stops by just to be like, hey, hello. And then you're like, okay, I really need to get something done, and anyway, just a
Yeah, and you want to be social and polite and courteous, but at the same time, it's like you don't want to engage that person too much because then they're going to keep doing it. And
well, thank you so much, Dr. Streit, for taking the time. I'll mute now so we can move forward. I know we have more to cover.
That's okay. So a little bit more here, why the push to return to the office now? So where's that coming from, that we need to get back into the office? What's kind of causing that? So 65% of executives believe that having employees work in an office is very important to increase employee productivity. So this was the number one reason, followed by having space to meet with clients, enabling employees to collaborate, and creating and maintaining company culture. So interestingly enough, it seems to be coming more from the top down. So from the higher kind of ups down, that they believe everybody should be back in the office. 85% of employees believe working in the office is important for collaborating and building relationships with team members. So there is this feeling from employees that they do want to be connected with others, and they do want to have this feeling of a team and collaboration. And it actually reduces loneliness that's associated with working remotely 100%, because it can get a little quiet sometimes, and you can kind of feel like you're in your cave instead of out and about in the world with people. So I think having that place to go to connect with others and to feel like you're part of that group and part of that larger organization really is important. There is this discrepancy, though, in terms of executives really wanted people to be back in the office all the time, 100%. And I think the people in charge, the employers, where the employees are like, no, maybe a day or two is okay. So there's kind of this discrepancy in their needs. So how are they going to be working long term? It seems as if hybrid work is the absolute winner by a landslide. So hybrid work schedules predominate office arrangements going forward. 53% expect a hybrid arrangement and 24% expect to work 100% remotely. So you're still having a good number of employees who are working either hybrid or fully remote. And these changes are going to allow for a much more flexible office and work environment than ever before, with twice as many people working remotely at least part of their week compared with pre-pandemic numbers. So what does that mean for management? I think that's part of the reason why they want everyone back in the office, because change is hard for everyone, even people who are in management, and they're kind of like, what do you mean? Like, how do we deal with this? What's going on? So they have to learn a lot of new skills about how to manage people and how to deal with all of this. It's very new to everyone. And then human resources departments also are going to need a lot of support, because now they have people that are working all over the place. And a lot of times all different states, and different states have different rules and regulations in terms of HR requirements. And it's a lot of work. So we might need to have bigger HR departments to kind of make sure we're in compliance there. And then a lot of the managers and management need to learn, how do I how do we manage these teams that are some of them are in the office, some of them are at home, some of them are hybrid. It's kind of like pandemonium, and they're all panicking, like, oh, we don't know what we're doing. I think that's where you're getting the push where they're like, let's just have everyone go back to the office full time. But change is good, and sometimes the status quo is actually not a good thing. Here's a statistic to kind of back that up. I know I'm jumping around a little bit. 63% of high growth companies use a productivity anywhere hybrid work model. So what does that mean, high growth? It means that they are actually growing, their bottom line is growing, they're expanding, they're getting bigger. And it really is shown that those models are faring better in this very volatile workplace. So kind of letting the employees figure out what to do and decide how and where they want to work really makes a big difference. And those companies tend to be much more successful, which is really fascinating. 55% of employers want to work, I thought you say employees want to work remotely at least 3 days a week. Senior level employees, okay, yes, the higher level individuals, those who are more experienced, more professional, are the ones who really want to work remotely. And that's what it kind of like, Emily, that was your question before about are they going to quit? Yeah, they will if they're not. And then somebody else is going to grab them, gobble them right up right away and say, oh yeah, please come work for us. We want you. Because they really have a set of skills and knowledge and abilities that a lot of people do not have today. And on the other side of that, about 30% of employees with less than 5 years of experience, they only want to work remotely like 1 day a week. So there's really something to that. And I think part of the demand for the remote work is that those more seasoned and experienced employees can do it. Because they're really in high demand. So it's kind of a way to attract those individuals and to keep them and retain them. And companies really want to do that. Okay, so kind of what I was talking about before, managers and executives need to learn new skills. And like most people, change is hard and they don't want to do it. So that's why they're telling, oh, everyone should just come back in the office and we want to go back to the way it was. There's no going back. You can't go back anymore. And I think we need to embrace where we are and to continue to move forward. So that's where they need to let go of the status quo and learn to manage the needs of both remote and traditional employees without showing favoritism or preference to those they know and see in person. That's really hard. In social psychology, there is a bias where we tend to like, it's called familiarity or proximity, where you tend to like people who you are familiar with and you have a lot of contact with. And, you know, even they say like the neighbors in an apartment complex who live near the mailbox are usually more popular because they get to see everyone and they get to know everyone a little bit more. Same thing for the managers. So they need to find a way to go out of their way to connect with the people that they don't know or that they're only connecting with remotely. And they have to try to build that bond and connection with them and give them that attention as well and not show any favoritism or preference. That's tough, right? I would think that would be really hard to do. And creating an us versus them environment needs to be avoided at all times. And that happens, believe it or not, where, you know, you're kind of out of sight, out of mind, and you're a remote employee. And then there are all these people in the office, you know, with the big bosses, and they forget about, oh, so-and-so has expertise and this one's been working on that project. So they really have to work really hard to make sure they know everyone on their team and they're bringing everyone in. And I think that's why you're still going to see a lot of these Zoom meetings going on as a way to make it an inclusive environment. So you can't just say, oh, this is only an in-person meeting. You have to make it inclusive and make it available to everyone in order for the team to be successful. Has anybody experienced that, by the way, or seen that? I'm just curious. You don't have to share if you don't want to, but it's an interesting, we had an interesting dilemma happen where somebody was going to be reporting to somebody who they would now be connecting with remotely, where their previous boss was in the office next to them and they weren't happy. So it can create a lot of discomfort for people, a lot of growing pains. And I would think it would be really hard to manage people and to try to not show any favoritism or preference. I mean, at the end of the day, we are human, so but they're going to have to find ways to like compensate and work against that, I think. And allowing workers more autonomy is really important for employee satisfaction and productivity. About 88% of employees reported that remote work has increased their job autonomy and job satisfaction. So autonomy means you have the ability to say when and where you're going to do your work and how you're going to go about doing it. So micromanaging with a remote employee is really not going to work. It's going to really backfire. So you have to give them that freedom and the ability to kind of do what they want when they want to do it. And again, I think that can be really tough to do if you're a manager, because it's like you want to get this work done. You have, goals, you have objectives, you have things you have to get. So you have to try to give them that leeway and give them that freedom to do it. And then the last thing I think here is creating a climate of trust is really the critical ingredient to success with a hybrid work team. So if you say you're going to do something, or you say you're going to, deliver something, or you say you're going to allow something, you need to really make sure that you do that. Your word is really key, and building that trust with your employees, even individually and as a team, I think is really important to do. All right. So what's going to happen if an organization doesn't support remote flexibility? You're going to get lower levels of engagement and well-being, and higher intent to leave, and greater levels of burnout. So you have to really allow the employee to kind of be given the option to work how they want to. Think about it. I think a lot of people experienced this during the pandemic when everybody was forced to work from home. A lot of people are like, I don't like this. I miss my job. But they were being forced to do it. So like most things in life, we're all like little kids, right? When you're forced to do something and you really don't want to do it, it's like, I don't want to do this. So that kind of happens, I think, with employees in the workplace too. So when they're given that freedom to choose, it makes a huge difference, and they really are a lot happier, a lot more satisfied, a lot more productive, and a lot less likely to leave their job too. And this kind of fits with that finding about growth-related businesses, that they really allow the employees to choose how they're going to contribute. And there are some crazy things. I was just hearing something, was it Microsoft? I think it was. They just said that was it Google or Apple? I'll have to check, where they're allowing employees to take off as many vacation days as they want throughout the year.
Oh gosh, I want to say it's Apple, but don't quote me. But I
think it was. I'll have to double check. And they can choose whether or not they want to work or not. But the funny thing that's ironic, when a lot of these companies do this, nobody takes advantage of it, or very few people do, because I think those are the employees that are just so enthusiastic and so excited about their job that they have to be like, no, you need to take vacation, you need to take time off, because they really are, they're a different type of employee. Okay, so being in person, again, I think we were talking about, it allows for that connection, that lack of isolation, that lack of feeling of loneliness, which is really, I think, one of the main reasons why that hybrid option is really key, because we do see that remote employees. I know when I started working remotely, and again, just speaking anecdotally here, not in general, I was like, wow, it's so quiet. Like, this is weird. And I used to have to get out and I'm talking to people, and I'm like talking to the girl at the checkout line on the grocery, that they don't even have them anymore sometimes. Now it's all self-checkout. But it's just, you're kind of like craving that human interaction. So I think that's a reason why the hybrid work arrangement is still a really important one for us, and a very popular one too. Okay, I'm just trying to feel like I don't want to keep rambling on here. I don't have too much more to share. Some of the challenges, I guess, and promises. Hybrid work creates questions of trust, accountability, just trying to move this here, and how to measure productivity. Complete equity among remote and in-person employees comes up frequently, like we were just talking about. And not just equity in terms of being recognized, but also financially. A lot of in-person employees are saying that they should get paid more because they don't have to pay for commuting. They have to pay for commuting and other costs that the remote employees do. do not. So that's kind of come up a couple of times. And then also equal access to hybrid opportunities for everyone. So if there's a job and, it's offered, is it only certain employees within a company who are being given that option to work in a hybrid capacity versus others? So almost like it's an added perk or incentive that really should be offered to everyone. Like, as you said, it's not just a work schedule. It's a new way of working together. And it's really becoming the expectation of the workforce. Pretty much everyone I know now, majority of people, they do work in a hybrid kind of flex environment a bit more so than ever before, where it's really become much more the norm. And that's good news for those employees because it's going to lead to a successful growth-oriented organization. Okay, and I think that's pretty much it. So I can stop sharing my screen if anybody had questions. I apologize if I was talking too much and if this went
Oh my gosh,
beyond
no,
the time.
it didn't go beyond the time. You're totally fine. And
Okay.
they're actually, your whole presentation is fascinating to me on a personal note, just because this is somewhat my research interest.
Oh, wait, really?
As a student. Yeah, so we could talk offline, but I want to allow Wendy to go ahead and ask her a question, and then I have another question in the chat too.
Sure.
Well, you may not know the answer to this, but I just really am perplexed and curious about the companies that give unlimited PTO. Like, how do they afford that in theory? Like, does anybody know the details of how a system like that works?
I think it's unusual and unique. I think it's a very different type of company. Like it's probably a super growth company like Apple or Google or something, really an innovator where they're doing things that are like that. But interestingly, what they're finding with those companies is they have a hard time getting the employees to take time off. So it's almost like they're trying to really say, we want you to take vacation time, and they're really encouraging their employees to take vacation time. But they're so enthusiastic about their work and what they're doing that they don't. And I think that was kind of where that was coming from. I know a lot of European companies, they had this kind of very different culture than we do in the United States, where there are some companies, for example, if you were emailing people after hours, you would get dinged, and they were even docking pay and taking, time away from people because they really were against this overworking kind of strategy. And kind of like what I was saying before about how when you take time off, it actually can help to refresh your brain and make you more productive and more creative. So I think it's more of that type of company where they're real innovators, real creative, kind of leading edge kind of companies that are doing things, maybe not leading edge, but, really doing things very differently than anyone else. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I wonder about the logistics of it. Like, do people still accrue a certain number of hours each pay period, and then they can
They don't track anything. They're just like, if you want to take a day off, you take a day off.
Wendy, you bring up an interesting question just in general. I just did a quick tiny Google search while we were looking in it, and it looks like it's Microsoft is the company.
That's who it was.
That is the employee that are getting unlimited time off. So they no longer require employees to formally record vacation. Yep. And so anyway, that's just a thing that's
so add that to your targeted job list if you want.
No, Wendy, you're right though. You do bring up an interesting point on that. I now I'm gonna have to go do some more research to figure out more of the companies that do offer that, but it's kind of fascinating how that would work.
I mean, there must be some other mechanism for them to manage accountability.
Yeah. And like I was saying, for those companies, all the data that I was looking at when I was reading some of those studies about them is that nobody is really taking advantage of that. It was probably maybe, out of all their employees, maybe a small handful were actually taking time off here and there and like traveling, and I'm here today, and oh yeah, I work for Google and I'm doing whatever I want. Kind of most people don't do that, and they have a problem a lot of times with those kinds of companies because the culture is so workforce focused that they were working too much. So it's almost like the company was trying to like find a way to push back and say, no, you
Balance.
need to take time off. Like you can't be working all the time. And we don't want, they're trying to say, we need to stop this. We need to pause. We need to find balance. But the employees who tend to work in those organizations, they're not like that. They're just so driven and so excited about their work. So, and even when people are in my own research that I've been doing, when people are on vacation, they're still checking email. So they're still doing work and they're still checking in and they're still responding, but then they shut it off and then they go back. So it's like there's not as many really, especially for the higher level employees. So the boundaries, I think, between work and free time are really blurred, and there's this kind of confusion going around as to, is it okay if I don't respond to email while I'm on vacation? Like,
Right.
yes, it is. It's actually good you do that, but again, it depends on the company and the level of the person too.
And then Regina brought this up earlier in the session today, but I thought it was an interesting question. So I'm going to go ahead and raise it and I'll see if you know anything about it. I know all of this research that you've been doing is rather new, right? Since the pandemic. So I'm not sure what's all out there on this subject matter, but do you find that clientele or patients or stakeholders complain more about getting efficient help from employees who are working from home? Like, have we seen also a rise in complaints for effectiveness or efficiency?
It's actually gone the other way.
Okay.
Yeah, and people are working more, and I think it's because it's like, oh wow, I don't have to commute, I get to stay. They're kind of like, this is so great, and they work harder. I think there's less distractions around them too, and they're just more focused on, let me just get my work done and do it all, and then that's it. So you don't have as many complaints from managers about employees slacking off or things like that. Typically. Now, again, if you're working for a company that's more into like micromanaging and stuff, I think then you might see that more, and then you might have more concerns. I know I just heard yesterday, I think the federal government just said they're calling their employees back to the office full time in person. So I'm not really surprised by that, because the federal government, I mean, a lot of the government employees are pretty micromanaged in their time, and they have to account for every minute of what they do and where they're at and things like that. So I think it maybe in a company like that with that kind of culture and climate, you might see that more of a concern of the manager, but I think that's because they are not able to keep tabs on them as readily as they would be if they were in the office. I think what you are seeing worry and concern about is people feeling like they're being monitored, and are people, monitoring my behavior and how much time I'm, working, how much time I'm not working. And there are some companies that have these monitors that, are checking on when are they working, how long are they work, what are they doing.
Right.
At the end of the day, the research shows that really, again, for most employees at a certain level or above, it's not very productive to do that.
Yes. That is fascinating. I do have one more question about the Great Resignation piece. And maybe this is too big of a question to end on, but I'm wondering what the demographics are of that, the Great Resignation. I'm wondering, are the baby boomers tied into that? And then they were just, so close to retirement that they were just like, you know what, I don't want to do this. So I'm just wondering, like, what factors into all of that, because I think it's one of the reasons why employers do have more, or employees do have more power to say what kind of working environment they want to work in, because there's just less of us.
Yeah, I don't know. I think what the pandemic did for a lot of people is it kind of shifted their priorities, where everything was more about, I need to take care of myself and my family. And we need to be healthy and we need to be well. And that needs to be priority number one. not I have to go to work, I have to make the money, I have to do this and that and the other thing, which a lot of families, unfortunately, they have to do that. But I think it
Right.
became more of a priority. And for people who have that little cushion or who have the retirement already, and they're like kind of like close to like, I'm just going to retire. Like it was just like the swaying factor that kind of pushed it over that. And the biggest change was women in the workplace during the pandemic. And this was really interesting that the majority of women actually quit their jobs. I think it was like a high percentage, like 70% were women who actually quit to resign and to stay home to take care of their families and their children and things like that. So I thought that was really interesting, but not necessarily good for women in the workplace. I think we regained a lot of those losses, but there was a big shift there as well. And again, not too surprising in terms of when there's like a big crisis and a lot of fear and anxiety and stress and what's going on, in terms of how a lot of families, not all, I shouldn't speak generically or stereotypically, but how they responded to that. It was really fascinating to me too, because we think we've come so far as a society and a culture in terms of women and being out in the workforce. But then when something like that happens, I think it still shines a light on, okay, we still have a little bit more work to do.
Thank you so much, Dr. Streit. I want to thank our attendees for your questions. I feel like I've gone through everything that I've seen in the chat. This is just a fascinating subject, just in general, because as you've mentioned, this is it moving forward. So how do we manage these things? How do we best prepare our employees and employer to meet the needs of the 21st century working space? So thank you so much for coming to present. And just for our attendees today, our next Skill Up series is Choosing the Right Statistical Analysis with our academic coach, Rachel Brune. That is on the 24th. Please feel free. I will actually include that as a link for the registration at the when I email this out to all of our attendees today. So thank you very much for all of your time. And until the next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye, Dr. Streit.